Hey, it's Pika again, and this week you get to put a face to the annoying voice from last week's video. That one was very edited, and I'd like to think professional. This one's gonna be much more casual, because there's a lot more to talk through, so we're just gonna chat through it, and there'll be pictures up on screen of anything that needs to be illustrated. We're gonna go over the 12 teams returning to the league from last year, and we're gonna get started with the London Spitfire, the winners from last year. The full Korean roster was expected to perform well, and they definitely did. They beat their arch enemies, NYXL and Seoul, and then went into the finals against Philadelphia Fusion. This is the same team that they'll be playing in Stage 1, their first match back, now in a few days. Together with the additions of Guard and Krillin, as well as a new coach with 11 years of experience, they're expected to perform well, especially that their only roster loss is Closer, who left to Dallas Fuel. So the Cloud9-owned team will be doing at least as well as they did last year, and with the long offseason to improve their synergy, they could be performing better. Since we already mentioned the Philadelphia Fusion, let's talk a little bit more about them. The Dark Horse team from 2018 definitely performed well, but they made some concerning changes to the roster since. The leaving players were Hotbutt, Joemeister, Dayfly, and Shadowburn, and those are all quite recognizable names. You wouldn't say each of them carried the team, but definitely that'll be a loss, and the only new player is Elk. So that, together with this leaving the DPS, Carpe, and EQO together with Boombox's support only as their main star power, it's really hopeful to rely on their improved synergy to carry them to such success as they did last year. But we'll have to see how they perform against the new teams and how they fit into the changes made to the recent ones. We're going to come back to the Atlantic Division, but let's talk about the Pacific region for a while, and specifically Seoul Dynasty, another team that was mentioned earlier in the video. The predicted 2018 frontrunners made a lot of changes to the roster in the offseason. Many players left, including Miro, their main tank, and the new signings include Fisher from the LA Gladiators and Korean Contenders players. This means that the team that originally started one of the biggest rosters in Season 1 is now down to 10 players, and we'll see how this plays out, especially that many people are predicting the return of Ri Jae-hyung's star power now that the meta has shifted from the one that didn't favor him in the later stages of Season 1, and we'll have to see how they perform against the new teams as well, with many Korean players coming into the scene now. Next up, let's talk about the Dallas Fuel, a team that makes a convenient case for where the regions separate. They're Pacific Division, but Houston Outlaws and another Texas team is Atlantic, which seems the line runs straight for the middle of the United States and then wraps around the world from both ends. The Dallas Fuel were definitely a subject of much discussion last year, with a lot of drama going on with XCC's suspension and a lot of roster changes mid-season. It seems like they made even more in the off-season, and we'll see if that's for the better. They added a lot of coaching staff. They now have a separate DPS, support, and tank coach, and it's notable that the tank coach is Coco, their main tank from last season. Together with Siegel and Chipsai, he left the roster, but they've added Zachary and RCK, very talented players, so we'll have to see if those perform at a similar level. With all the changes made, it's interesting to see how the very metal-reliant team last year will perform and if they manage to synergize and move past the drama. Can't have one Texas team without the other, so let's talk about the Houston Outlaws. The considerably mid-range team last year garnered a lot of support from fans, but not a lot of traction, so we'll see if the roster changes help amend that. They gained Dante from the SF Shock, but unfortunately that did cost them Mendukase, Clockwork, and Fat Fiction, true unseasoned players. That means that the team is now left with Linkster and Jake on the star DPS roles with support from Muma. This should be enough to get them back to where we were last season, but the team wants to improve. Their coaching staff should be really worried about how to synergize them better and help them prepare for the new metas coming along in Season 2. We spoke about the battle for Texas, completely ignoring the one going on in LA. So let's talk about the Los Angeles Gladiators. The team went in 4th seed into the playoffs, but went against the 5th seed London Spitfire and unfortunately lost, falling out of the finals. This isn't to say though that they weren't steadily improving throughout Season 1. Their performance was exceptional compared to the predictions, and with the new additions to the roster from contenders teams Kong de Panthera and Team Ganti, despite their losses like Fisher moving to Seoul Dynasty and the other 3 players, we're predicting that they might do quite a bit better than they did last year. This, however, is not certain because not much is known about their current performance. The coaches have been staying quite secretive, either out of concern or just out of humility, and not much has been heard out of players and scrims either. So we'll have to wait and see how the Glads actually perform in a match whenever they play in Stage 1. And our other LA team will of course be the Valiant. Not much can be said in terms of predictions just because how inconsistent the team was in Season 1. They went up against some of the big names like NYXL, but they ended up losing those matches. And despite seeing some really strong players and really consistent shot calling from Casta and Fate, we really did not see the breakthrough that they seem to have potential for. They now gained Cookie from Seoul Dynasty, and so despite some other changes and losses to the roster, this should make them a little bit more reliable, and they did have a very long offseason to train in. So hopefully they've polished out those differences and will be able to go up against the teams at the upper echelon of Overwatch League all over again, because it really did seem that the players individually had that potential. Alright, now that I've already come up, let's talk about the New York Excelsior, or NYXL, how everyone seems to call them. The team definitely did well last year, but they ended up being dethroned by a shift in the meta. They went 34-6, but most of those losses were in the later stages of the game. They were even accused of sandbagging, which means not playing to the best of their ability just because they had already secured their place in the playoffs, even though when it came to those, they didn't perform that great either and did not end up securing the final. We do see changes that make sense for the team though. Janus, their main tank, has ended up leaving to the Washington Justice, and this is a reasonable decision just because the NYXL's playstyle centers around their DPS Zenyatta, Jonak, and it's difficult to protect the backline with a very aggressive tank. We do also see the addition of Flower and Nan. They're both from XL to Academy, which is the active purpose of the sub-org, to source Overwatch League players eventually once they've proven themselves in contenders. So with all those improvements, we hope to see a slightly more synergized and anchored playstyle from NYXL that will hopefully carry them through and allow their other star players to shine despite the changes in the meta. This is a good moment to mention that the setup this year will be a little bit different from last year when each team played 40 matches. This time, everyone will play the teams in their division twice and the opposite division once, which means every rankings and predictions might be a little bit skewed just because a team might face off in a very different meta than they originally started in, and that might make the results look different. With that said, let's move on to the Shanghai Dragons, the team who certainly is all over the place on everyone's ranking list for this year, some having expected them to not budge from their winless spot last season, and some expecting them to fly through the ranks. They did indeed win nothing last season, but they did already have one win against the Chengdu Hunters in the preseason community countdown matches. It's also difficult to talk about the Shanghai Dragons as most of the roster has been swapped out for Kongdu Panthera players. The only players that were originally left were Dia, Geguri, and Fearless has just recently announced that he's taking a personal break. This means that potentially there will be an addition of Gamsu from the Boston Uprising, there's been rumors of that, but it practically leaves us with a new roster. This is unusual. There is teams joining what we're calling new rosters, 8 of them that we spoke about last week, but for a team that already performed last year and the coaches that already know what to expect, it'll be interesting to see how differently they train and where that lands them in the standings. Was I out of focus for the first 10 teams? Absolutely. Are we retaking that? Nope, we're pretending it never happened and moving straight onto the Boston Uprising. And there's certainly a team that nobody is certain where to place this year. The individual players on it are insanely talented, and you'll see their place in a lot of best of the year compilations everywhere, but the team's lack of synergy and even more enthusiasm landed it close to the bottom last year. So later on we learned that this was because of a lot of drama going on behind the scenes, notably with Dreamcasper and his terrible behavior, but we'll have to see how those were resolved and if the coaching staff, with the addition of Gunba from the OCU region and another player that we see from them, Collarhouse from New Zealand, will have resolved that. We also see the addition of a lot of NA Contenders players and Alameo from South American Contenders. Boston will be a whole new roster with hopefully a whole new attitude, so it won't be until a few games in that we'll actually be able to accordingly judge their performance this year. Last but by no means least, or specifically second to last year, will be the Florida Mayhem. And the team certainly underperformed, but it's another one of those that did a complete roster overhaul, so there isn't much left to talk about the original Florida Mayhem roster and thus their performance. They did leave behind Saya player, Tivik, and SMT, but they left 6 teammates and then brought in 6 new ones. So we'll see if the coach attitude, together with the new snazzy graphics overhaul, will have changed and let them excel amongst existing players, because they will have an upper hand on the new ones, having already experienced the toil and pressure of the Overwatch League, but there isn't anything at the moment pointing to their success in comparison to the effort that the other 12 teams have put in. And that brings us to a tired, tongue-tied, and hopefully happy ending. As of when I'm filming this right now, it's a little bit over 24 hours to the Stage 1 Season 2 matches, so I'll try to get this edited and posted as soon as I can. And at the moment, I'm planning on filming videos probably after each stage, just to give a countdown on what went down, how the teams are looking, and how the standings are going. And as of right now, signing out. Have a lovely day.